Fenway Rundown, third time's the charm on a Friday, December 12th, third of the week, first from home. Sean, how was your travel back from Orlando?
Oh, couldn't have been smoother. In fact, I enjoyed it too much. It stretched over a couple of days.
Yeah, that's great. Well, welcome home.
Thank you.
We are back in the Fenway Rundown home studios. I'm Chris Cotillo with Sean McAdam. We talked on Wednesday about Pete Alonso signing with the Orioles that had just broken as we sat poolside. As we sit here in the comfort of our own homes, it's a little chillier than it
Not
was.
quite as tropical here.
Yeah, as we were doing that. Though it wasn't like 80, it was like 66. We would have taken it. And the Red Sox, without much movement in the last couple of days. There were some free agents that have fallen off the board, from Robert Suarez to Mike Yastrzemski, some guys that we didn't think the Red Sox were going to be in on. And so the question remains, who's the bat and where will it come from? Red Sox also swing a small Rule 5 trade as we expected them to in the time since we recorded. So we'll touch on that very briefly. But it's all about offense all the time, where it's coming from. You and I both had reports that went up this morning. Your weekly notebook that goes every Friday. I did a what we're hearing type thing on their search for bats, and so we'll get to those things and more. I think, put simply, point blank, Alonso and Schwarber are off the board, and Josh Naylor, I guess, from a few weeks ago. Other than that, the landscape remains wide open. The Red Sox remain interested in everybody. The names that I identified as the most strong fits right now: Ketel Marte, very popular name we've talked about; Brendan Donovan in St. Louis; Isaac Paredes in Houston, a guy we've talked about; obviously Alex Bregman, Bo Bichette, a guy in the mix; Jorge Polanco, maybe as a fallback. One interesting piece of reporting that we were able to uncover the last couple of days: Eugenio Suarez seems to be a guy who I would consider more in the fallback category than some of the others. So I would put him at less likely than many of the others. But that's the group. And Wilson Contreras, the guy they're looking to acquire from the Cardinals, he has a full no trade clause. So can the Red Sox be the first team in MLB history to get two veterans from the same team to waive their no trade clause to come in the same offseason? I don't know if that's an
We
accurate
should we
historical
should
fact.
find out what the relationship is between Sonny Gray and Wilson
That's
Contreras,
true.
and figure out whether one is going to detract from another joining him.
And Heim Bloom's doing more work in the Red Sox farm system in this last 6 weeks than he did while he was here. That's not true. But, I mean, they got Gray and they're in on Contreras and Donovan. Okamoto, another option. I mean, there's probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 guys that are real possibilities here. I was saying a couple weeks ago, I would be shocked if they didn't end up with Alonso, Schwarber, or Bregman. Well, now that bucket has
Down to
expanded
one.
a little bit. Yeah. So we'll get to all of that. You had a report talking to an agent about their aversion to long-term deals. To you, where obviously we just gave you the names. I will say, as of last night, nothing was close. They're clearly pushing in all directions. They're not waiting necessarily on Bregman's decision. To me, it's anything is still in play. They're still hell bent on getting one of these guys. I think Marte is the best fit of all. It might also be the most costly. How would you, in just simple terms, define where they are right now?
Well, their options have been reduced, obviously, by both Schwarber and Alonso coming off the board. That much is obvious. And those two guys, though neither is perfect, probably represented the two best options out there for them. And from what we can tell, the Red Sox weren't particularly close on either of them. One of them may have been the acknowledgement that Schwarber was probably not going to leave Philadelphia. Indeed, he did not. But I think their sort of very blasé uh, uh, involvement in the Alonso negotiations is pretty surprising. He's not a perfect player. I raised some questions earlier in the offseason about a guy who at 31 is now a slow base runner and not a good defender. Those things aren't going to get better with age. But when you talk about durability and offensive production, Alonso had a lot to offer. And yet the Red Sox were way out of the Orioles uh, league when it came to whatever they offered for Pete Alonso. So, excuse me, there are other um, There are other options left on the free agent market, but most of them are have some red flags. You talked about Eugenio Suarez, a guy that can strike out 200 times a year and is really a net negative defensively. He really can't play third base for any stretch of time anymore. And you don't know if he could adapt to first base. So if you were looking strictly for a DH, which otherwise they might be with one wrinkle, he might be a decent short-term ad, but then that also renders Masataka Yoshida's $36 million remaining dollars kind of dead weight. If you bring in Suarez to be your everyday DH and supply that right-handed power, which he no doubt would do in Fenway, then you've got yourself $36 million to unload or to release or eat, and that brings with it its own problems. I'm with you. I think Marte is probably the best solution out there, but that's going to get uncomfortable in terms of the return. When you look at the possibility or the reporting that has the Tampa Bay Rays ready to trade both Shane Baz and Ryan Pepio in exchange for Marte, then you start to get a understanding of how much young pitching it would take the Red Sox to give up to make that trade. Do they want to, having turned on the pitching pipeline here, do they want to unload what they have taken years to build up in one trade? That's a question they have to answer, of course. And the others, I don't see them in on Bichette just because he's going to get, I would imagine, a 5 or 6 year deal. We know that they're not big on those. And the others on
more
the free
than that.
agent. Pardon me?
He'll get more years than that, I think.
Yeah, probably. But I was saying that as a minimum. And, the others have some issues attached to them. So there's no perfect solution. Indeed, Schwarber and Alonso weren't perfect, but they were the best, and now they're gone.
Yeah. Well, we both like Marte. We've talked about that. And I think you look at it from the casting a wide net. There was a report that they're going to go get 2 guys. I think they could. There's also a possibility that if they get one, really good fit, then they could figure it out elsewhere. Like the bigger the first name is, I think, then increases the chances that the second name is not a huge, especially money wise. I don't think there's not many pathways to where you get 2 free agents or left. Bichette and Bregman would be the one that's not going to happen. So, I think as they look at it now, they remain engaged with Bregman. That's one, clear, easy pathway, but there are a lot of others in that first base DH mold.
Yeah,
in that second, at third.
We need to point out again that while retaining Bregman, bringing Bregman back would be a positive move for his defense, for his right-handed bat, for all the intangibles he brings. That only brings them back to where they were in the first week of October, which is to say, not good enough offensively. Simply bringing Bregman back doesn't make them better. It makes them as good as they were a year ago, when by their own admission, they weren't good enough offensively.
Yeah. I mean, if they do Bregman and one other piece, then you're basically looking at the offense other than that one swap out is a wash. And you're talking about, Gray for Giolito and Oviedo for, I don't know, he's better than Dustin May, but that place in the rotation toward the end of the year. And then Watson from the Rule 5 and Sanamiego in for Bernardino. It's, stuff around the edges. And that's how you look at it.
A lot of that projection has to be the improvement.
Yeah, right. That's
the
what I was
think
about
you're
to say.
going to get from Anthony, from Meyer, from guys who are going to get more playing time.
Right, but my point is that when you're doing, if you do Bregman and it's just kind of trimming around the edges and the roster is not from an external perspective markedly better, then you are putting the pressure on all of those guys to take a big step forward. A lot of the injured players to come back healthy. That can happen. I mean, it might, but there's also the chance that, some of these guys backslide. And like anything is go all Kevin Garnett here possible. Like there's a chance Garrett Crochet has a minor injury that takes him out for a month next year, and then the whole calculus of this team changes. There's a chance Anthony gets hurt, as we saw, like everybody's penciled in for 162 games at the beginning of every season. You don't have to look farther than last year to see what attrition can do. And obviously, Crochet stayed healthy, and some other guys from Duran to Story and some others played the whole year. But in today's game, people get banged up all the time, especially pitchers. So, bringing back the same cast, you're assuming health, which is a big ask. There's no signs that anybody will break down, but it's always in play once the ball gets rolling in late March. So I think, to me, Bregman and Marte is a path that could happen. Marte talks described as exploratory to me last night. I think that's just because there's so many teams in the mix. The caveat here that I keep saying is that, you talk to like other GMs, other people in the mix that have these players who are clear trade candidates. And it's like, we can just hold on to them,
Well, Craig Breslow said that in one of the availabilities this week, that that is a line that he's frequently hearing in trade talks, kind of like, hey, if you don't meet our price, we're good just staying as we are.
Yep.
And he said that's more of a common answer this offseason than any he can remember. And I'm not sure what the reason is for that. Maybe it's the looming lockout. Maybe teams want to wait and see where things go in terms of what financial arrangements are governing the game. But there does seem to be a feeling like, okay, we're asking for for $1.25 for $1 worth of goods. And if you're not going to overpay, then we'll walk away and keep those guys.
I'm going to give you a real dumb conspiracy theory that I'm literally hatching as we're sitting here on this. And this probably is not going to make sense because, it is the Fenway Rundown after all. But what if teams who have these valuable players think that they would be able to get as much or more from them at the trade deadline because teams are looking, if they're in contention then, as their only chance to win a World Series and potentially a 2-year window if the lockout is in contention to wipe out 2027. What if teams are going to be ultra aggressive at the trade deadline trying to get guys on expiring deals or with a year and a half left, which is what a lot of these guys are in because 2027 is in jeopardy. And so maybe that
I would say that rule applies to the absolute top end of the market. A guy like Skubal is going to be still highly valued on July 31st if he's with the Tigers, and your return probably, even though you're getting him for just 2 months in the postseason rather than 6 months in the postseason, you can still ask for the world and probably get it. I would say for a lot of these guys, that doesn't hold. It has to be the elite talent that is still going to be fought over, where there's a huge market if you put them out there at the deadline, and you can get nearly as much or almost as much as if you do it now. I don't think that applies to most of the market, just the real cream of the crop.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Again, just to spur the moment, we're overtired conspiracy thing here on December 12th. But, you sometimes, teams value this as, and let's say the lockout doesn't exist for a second, how many playoff runs you get out of a guy. So if you get Brendan Donovan or Ketel Marte for, still the playoff run this year, even though you didn't have him for April, May, and June, July, teams are still going to value that. The point is that these GMs can hold and they can stand pat. This isn't, a deadline where you got to move your rental or you're not going to be able to get him back. This is, there's a bar to clear. And, honestly, we really haven't seen that many trades go down. Gray, obviously here. Oviedo, obviously here. The Semien for Nimmo trade. Grayson Rodriguez for Taylor Ward. But, a lot of the top offseason trade candidates still haven't moved. There were a lot of talks at the winter meetings. We saw in the last week or two the free agent market really be more active. And it's interesting. Breslow did allude to that. Again, to get the player you want, to push yourself over the top, you need to get uncomfortable. I think the Red Sox did that in their, heads with the Crochet trade a year ago, and I think it's on them to do it again. Um, but it's I do look at it from the perspective of if they get to spring training and it's the offseason additions are Gray and Oviedo in the rotation, subtract Giolito, and then swap out a couple relievers, no stars, and then it's Bregman and a second piece. If that's Marte, great. If it's not, less great. Um, are fans going to be happy considering what they thought it was going to be at the beginning of the offseason? Let's look at, I mean, we don't have to guess on this. Um, we can look at what we predicted for the offseason just 5 or 6 weeks ago. I said they were going to sign Schwarber. You said Bregman. Smith said Alonso. You have a chance. Um, I had them getting Gore and Michael King. I don't think that's going to happen. You had them getting Joe Ryan. I don't think that's going to happen. And Smith had them getting Joe Ryan and Giolito. I don't think that's going to happen. Most significant trade addition, I had Gore. You guys had Ryan. Probably not going to happen on any of those three things. I mean, to me, like we are very realistic and we're not like these exaggerated shoot pie in the sky people because we talk to so many people who lower expectations by talking about reality. We still had higher expectations than what this is shaping up to be. Again, can't penalize them for what they have or haven't done yet. But I think if it's like if your two big ticket items are Gray and Bregman, I think it's comes in a little lower than the expectations were. Again, we're not there yet. If it's Gray, Marte, and Bregman, maybe it's different, but it's a big ask too.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to make up. And while there are still 2 months to go before spring training, and as we saw last year, you can still make significant moves after you report to Fort Myers,
Yep.
as they did with Alex Bregman, coming to an agreement 2 or 3 days after guys were starting to come into camp. So there's no hard deadline here other than what the market dictates. So the calendar says there's 2 months, but how long are some of these other options going to be out there, either in trade or in free agency?
Yep. I mean, I think the free agent market in terms of bats has dwindled. Obviously, Tucker is out there and Bellinger, they're in a different category because you don't need them. Bichette and Bregman, the two top guys that they could still look at. The trade market is where I think they have to strike. And that would be they made a big trade a year ago. They made two, one pretty big and one medium sized trade so far. But the prospect pool, the pool is depleted. In that way. Let's get into who you'd give up. Like, had a lot of conversations about this at the winter meetings with just people, going back and forth and fake trade proposals with the Lou Merlonis and Tom Cairns of the world and just kind of bandying about different stuff. And obviously, kind of more rooted in fiction than fact when you're playing that game. When you're looking at a guy like Marte, to me, we talked about that Pepio and Shane Baz line. I'm not giving up early and Tolley really in any deal. I think it's just too much of your future. I actually would rather give up early than Tolley because I think the ceiling is higher on Tolley and the value. This might be the only time you're ever going to see Early's value be higher than Tolley or where it is. I mean, if you think about where Early's value was on August 1st, on September 1st, it was a, mid-range pitching prospect. He had a great month and an okay, pretty good playoff start, even though the line wasn't. And now maybe I think there's kind of a lot of helium and it's a little inflated and teams can see that he did it in the big leagues in a small sample. And maybe it's time to move on from him and sell high. I would keep Tolley over him. When it comes to Meyer, another guy who is in the mix, I feel like you might be selling a little low on him because of the injury stuff, but who knows? I don't know. The perfect package for me is, I think, if you're going to go get a real star, if you can do it for one of the outfielders and early, I would probably be okay with that. I've talked a lot about, Sadon as a guy that I would think about because of the value. And if you can, avoid trading one of the top pitchers because of that, great. Where do you sit with who you like to part with, who you like to keep? Who's untouchable?
I'm
I think
I'm
I
with
think
you
no
that you
one's
keep
untouchable, but
right.
yeah,
I'm with you. I don't think you can give up both Tolley and Early. They have invested too much in trying to develop their own pitching. They are finally having some success with that, and I realize that combined, these guys haven't made 10 big league appearances yet, or maybe just barely. Um, so you need to see more at the big league level, but both their performance at AAA and what they were able to do in small sample sizes in September is encouraging. That this pitching pipeline is finally flowing, and you have the hope of not having to go into the free agent pitching market, which is the most expensive and inefficient of them all, because you're paying for guys in their 30s, you're overpaying. Dylan Cease, who is a good pitcher, to me is not a $210 million pitcher, and yet yes, he is, because a team gave it to him. If you want to avoid going into that expensive market every 2 or 3 years, then you can't be trading away all of your top pitching prospects. To me, given where they are, I think they should expand their field of available prospects to guys that haven't gotten to the big leagues or maybe aren't even particularly close. Someone like Franklin Arias, an athletic shortstop, a
yep,
plus defender. The offense is somewhat in question. Is he going to hit enough? Is he going to be a run producer at the big league level? Still to be determined, but a great raw physical specimen who we know is going to be an elite defender. That's got great value at this level. So it doesn't have to be somebody that you are counting on integrating into the roster the next year or two. It can be someone a little lower down the food chain who is still highly valued by other teams in the industry.
yeah, and that's where I think it comes down to making the decisions on who you need to keep. And I think, like they said, basically, well, we're not going to trade Roman at any point in the last couple of years. That obviously turned out okay. And I think too, fans, Twitter, whoever, very quick to put together all of the kind of pieces that don't fit in. Well, just Campbell, or Casas, or these guys. Think about the value and what they have on the actual market. I call that the Bobby Dahlbeck theory, right? Where everybody, oh, he doesn't have a place here. Well, they probably tried to trade him and didn't have any value for him for years. So that's where they are right now. To me, I still think Marte is the number one guy they should be going after. He's the closest thing to a complete player, as we've talked about. I was Team Schwarber number one. Now I'm Team Marte number one. I like that. I'd rather do Marte than Bregman. If you can do them both, great. But it's on them now to deliver. I mean, I obviously they're going to add somebody. A lot of these other pieces don't really do it for me. Contreras, you could talk me into. Donovan and Paredes, I know they don't have the name value like some of these other guys, but they had good years. I still would say Marte is the guy, but it's not a guarantee that happens, and it's far from it based on
Yeah,
what we've
no,
heard
they've
right
got
now.
plenty of competition, and
Yeah,
we've already talked about Tampa Bay, and to me, one of the underreported aspects of that rumor or that willingness for the Rays to give up those two young pitchers to attract Ketel Marte is a willingness on the part of the Rays under new ownership to take on that kind of money. Now, we've already explained that a good chunk of Marte's remaining 5 years is deferred money, so you can play around that from an accounting standpoint. But the fact that the Tampa Bay Rays are talking about bringing in a guy who is due more than $100 million over the next 5 years is another reminder of the sea change that's happening in the American League East now. We saw it most obviously with the Orioles and Alonso, and now their willingness to talk about guys like Framber Valdez and maybe even Kyle Tucker. It used to be, well, you got to worry about the Yankees and maybe the Blue Jays, who couldn't give their money away for a number of years. Now guys are taking it, like Cease and like Tucker May, who certainly has visited their facility and is at least considering them. It's one more reminder that the American League East is changing, and it's not just the Yankees and the Blue Jays you have to worry about anymore.
yep. So they walk away from the winter meetings with the Von Grissom deal done. We talked about that on Wednesday. Ryan Watson, I think they basically just love huge pitchers, no matter what, no matter where you're coming from. This is basically, they didn't give up much of a prospect. Reamer was a high pick who hasn't really played well in the last couple of years. But Ryan Watson, I know you had a scouting report on him. We'll get to in a second. They hit on Whitlock. They hit on Slayton. Those are like found money bonuses almost when you hit on a Rule 5 guy who turns into a contributor. They're hoping the same thing can happen. If he stinks in spring training, they can move it along. Just another guy, hard thrower to add to the bullpen, get in the lab. To me, no harm. The real harm is that you have this guy occupying the 40-man spot. For now, if they go out and sign somebody, they can DFA him too and return him as a Rule 5 pick even before spring training. But you have the spot. I think he's more valuable on your 40-man than Von Grissom was for all the reasons we outlined the other day. So kind of a why not move, and we'll see where it goes. What were your?
The organization has had a good track record with finding Rule 5 pitchers in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah,
Garrett Whitlock, of course, is the poster child of that. Somebody they got for, I don't even know what the Rule 5 cost is, whether it's 50 or 100 grand now, whatever it is, it's minimal.
I'll take either.
Justin Slayton is another example where they maneuvered to get access to that pick, just like they did with Watson the other day. It's worth taking a flyer. We've particularly with bullpen arms, which are very volatile. Sometimes a change of scenery, sometimes a new voice in the ear can unlock something. And to me, I know people were complaining that, why are they obsessed with Rule 5 guys when they should be signing people like Pete Alonso? That's an apples and oranges discussion. The fact is that you should be on the lookout for talent, no matter how inexpensive or expensive it is, or ways to improve your team. And by improving your pitching depth, you're getting better, even if it's not a household name or a big contract like Alonso would have represented. So good for them for trying, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to ever excuse cheapness when they can spend money. To me, though, if there's an area where you're going to be relatively cost effective on, we've seen bullpen volatility, and I think now more than ever, even more than when I started on the beat 7 or 8 years ago, for whatever reason. We talked last year until we were blue in the face on this pod about Kirby Yates and Tanner Scott, and just they got to get these guys, and look at that. I mean,
sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't make.
And $72 million for Tanner Scott's already looking at like one of the worst deals in the league. Obviously, the Dodgers, it didn't stop them from winning the World Series, but
spending almost $70 million to get his replacement.
Right. So
which they did with Edwin Diaz.
So is Ryan Watson as good as Edwin Diaz? No. But the cost of a Rule 5 pick versus the $70 million, like you look at these teams look at surplus value. I think it is an easy way. You talked about Whitlock, you talked about Slayton, you get these guys in. Other guys who have been helpful, Zach Kelly as an undrafted free agent, as a minor league guy. So look at a lot of the guys who have turned into something elsewhere. Ort has pitched well in Houston. Other guys across the league, you just never know when these guys are going to pop. Bernardino is a useful piece for 3 years off a waiver claim. There are times you should spend. I think their deal for Chapman was a really, really smart one. Both of them last year and in September. The deal for Wilson last year was good. The deals for Kenley and Martin were very, very good when they spent on them. But with reliever volatility, like there's a lot of spots you're going to need a lot of guys. It doesn't hurt. And I think it's a smart teams capitalize on the Rule 5 because it's an easy way to bring talent into the organization. Again, we may never see this guy pitch in a Red Sox uniform. Not a lot of risk involved, and that's the time we will spend on Mr. Watson. That's the Fenway Rundown for today. We will be back next week. If there's a move, an emergency episode. If not, regularly scheduled programming. Until then,